So I'd like to call this meeting of the Public Accounts Committee to order. It's just a minute after 9, and we like to get underway. We're pretty formal here. The witnesses this morning are from the Department of Service Nova Scotia Municipal Relations, and our subject today is the Land Registry System. So we have with us several guests, but I'm going to begin with the introductions of the committee members, and we'll go right around for the record, including our guest today. So if I could begin with Mr. Smith.
I'm Morris Smith from Antigonish.
Good morning, Howard Epstein, MLA for Halifax, Chebucto, substituting for Becky Kent.
Good morning, I'm Jim Morton for representing Kings North, and I'm here for Matt Wynot.
Leonard Pereira, Halifax, Citadel, Sable Island.
Keith Caldwell, MLA Preston.
Alan McMaster, MLA for Inverness.
Diana Whalen, MLA for Halifax Clayton Park and Chair of the Committee.
Alan Horgan, Deputy Auditor General.
Darlene Henry, Committee Clerk.
Norman Hill, Registrar General.
Thank you.
Kevin Malloy, Deputy Minister, Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Nancy Saunders, Director of Geographic Information Services.
Very good, and welcome to the witnesses and guests today. And I wonder if you had an opening statement, Mr. Malloy, if you'd like to get us underway.
Yes, I do, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Before going any further, I'd like to reintroduce my two members of my senior team here. Nancy Saunders, on my right, recently took up a new role as Director of Geographic Information Services, and she's been a significant member of the land programs for many years and our in-house expert. To my left, Norman Hill, Registrar General of Land Titles, who was appointed on January 18th of this year. I thank the members of this committee for giving us this opportunity to talk about the province's land registration system. 10 years ago, government made a decision to enhance the protection of Nova Scotia's $74 billion real estate asset and improve the efficiency of real estate transactions and financing. A multi-million-dollar investment was then made to put in place new legislation that would guarantee title on all land parcels and established an electronic land title system to replace the 250-year-old one patterned after the British Registry. Over the years, this investment has consistently proven to be a wise one for the province. The system is one that can be easily enhanced in a cost-effective and sustainable way to continue to meet the needs of Nova Scotians now and into the future. In 2001, the House of Assembly enacted the Land Registration Act, which gave authority for land ownership and related interests in Nova Scotia to be guaranteed through a land title system. A gradual migration of Nova Scotia's 6,000 land parcels into the new system began across Nova Scotia in 2003. Today, 40% of land parcels have been converted to the land registration system, and more are being added at about a rate of 30,000 per year. Since its initial implementation, numerous improvements have been made to the system, such as the introduction of e-submission and e-payment methods, improvement of the standards for parcel descriptions, stricter requirements for easements, and the elimination of the ability for non-authorized users to record and remove interest. As a result, what we have in place today is a leading-edge land registration system that guarantees ownership of land parcels to parties involved in buying or mortgaging real estate in Nova Scotia. This system is made possible because of an effective partnership between Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations and the Nova Scotia Barrister Society. The province's guarantee of title is backed up by the authorized lawyer's certificate of title. The system facilitates over $3.5 billion annually in property transfers, and probably the same amount in mortgages and other secured financing transactions. Part of the process of modernizing the system has been to electronically scan, index, and make available online 250 years of land records. As at this time, 75% of this work has been completed, and 30 million images of documents are now available online. Our world-class land registration system provides subscriber access to Nova Scotia's land records from any online location. It allows fast, off-site title searches and completion of transactions from anywhere in the province. In the past, documents were registered in paper only, and title searches required manually going through paper indices and documents at each county registry. In contrast, today, 75% of all documents that enter the land registration system are submitted electronically, saving precious time for lawyers, their clients, and registry office staff. Today, when a property is sold, mortgaged, or subdivided, the Land Registration Act requires that the land parcel be moved to the new system. Once each property has been migrated to the land registration system, future transactions can be conducted more quickly, and the historic title search is no longer required, providing savings in legal costs and transaction closing time. The new land registration system has also helped government set new levels of efficiency in providing service to Nova Scotians. For instance, the establishment of the e-registry has resulted in a dramatic and continuing reduction in the space required for registry offices and has reduced the need for vaults to protect paper documents. In Halifax alone, this has meant a reduction in space requirements of around 10,000 square feet. 4 land registration offices are 100% electronic, and 11 offices are partly electronic. The new system has also consistently resulted in greater efficiency in deed transfer tax collection on behalf of municipalities. As you can see, the benefits of moving to this electronic system are great, but perhaps the biggest benefit is that the new land registration system has made it easier, more secure, and more convenient for landowners and their representatives to facilitate the sale, mortgaging, and development of properties. I'd like to end by stating that Nova Scotia's land registration system today continues to be a working, living, and growing system that is easy to use, cost-effective, and very efficient. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Malloy. And I think with that, I should first introduce Mr. McKinnon, who's joined us, and welcome this morning.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And we'll begin with our first 20 minutes of the first 20-minute round. We'll begin with the Liberal Party and Mr. Colwell. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've got some sort of housekeeping questions I'd like to ask first, and then I'll go on to some other ones. What does it cost to operate this system, just the land registry system, a year now?
The annual cost was calculated back in 2002 when the initial rate was set. And at that point in time, do you remember what the cost was that we used?
I don't recall the exact figure.
We don't have the exact figure at this time for when it was calculated in 2002. And at that time, the fee was set such that the full cost of the system was recoverable from the transactions related to land transactions in Nova Scotia.
So what's the total cost of running, or what's the total budget for running it now, year to year?
The total budget is divided up between 4 of our units. There's a budget for the land registration unit. I think it's around 1.4 million. We have our service delivery organization has about 480 people, of which a fairly sizable portion are related day in and day out to land registration transactions, but we don't have that segregated by program because of the integrated manner in which our people work. They work on a variety of different programs, and so it's not possible to say that this individual is always working on a land registration transaction or a motor vehicle transaction. And the other component of that cost would be through our management, our technology group, who are, and the demand there is really dependent on the amount of new implementation or new technology changes, as well as the day-to-day support activities. We'd have to go through a fairly in-depth analysis to give you a precise cost on what it actually costs to run the system annually.
Okay, I can understand that. Just the property online, any idea how much that costs to operate, that part of it?
Once again, no. I mean, property online is the system that the lawyers interact with on a day-to-day basis. That is the front face of the entire land registration system.
Do the operating, are the operating costs totally covered by, on the yearly basis, that is, by the user fees?
My understanding would be, based on the evaluation we did in 2002, the answer is yes. We've had some changes over the years in that we continue, the early plan was not to move into e-submission as aggressively and as quickly as what we've done. And to move into the e-submission world, we've been spending a fair amount of money to go back and scan the documents, because you have to have all the documents and the subdivision plans and everything automated right back to day one to allow an office to go to a full electronic search. So the cost that we're incurring annually just to do that part of it, somewhere between $500,000, and in some years we've spent as much as $2 million. So the cost, I suspect, is probably still going to be relatively high versus what we're collecting in revenue, but they'd be approximate. The other factor that comes into play there is that the revenue tends to vary a bit year to year, just depending on the activity in the marketplace. Some years we have a lot more activity of purchase and sale of home, remortgaging, that type of thing. Depends partially on the interest rates and the marketplace.
And the user fees, who typically pays the fees? Would it be law firms or banks, or what? Who's your clientele, I should say?
Miss Saunders.
The client that the authorized lawyer is acting as agent for pays the detransfer tax, the registration of the document fees, and the law firm would pay a fee to access property online, and that would be probably recovered through disbursements to clients as well.
Okay. What are the benefits beside the obvious one? Is there any benefits besides the obvious one that helps pay for the whole system, the user fees? Is that the main benefit you get from it, or is it easier to operate? Or?
Well, there's several
Ms.
benefits.
Saunders, yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
There are several benefits to the new system if you compare it to the old traditional registry of deeds system, which was really inherited from the British system. It was paper-based. You had to go to the location in each county to do the searches. A lawyer had to certify title to each client or each citizen as the citizen acquired title to property. So there was a repetitive historic search that had to be done each time a new person purchased a property. The system was names-based. All the indexing was done for the documents based on names associated with the documents. So there were a lot of inherent issues with that, especially in Nova Scotia because of the many similar names. The new system eliminated a lot of those errors or those risks because it is parcel-based. It is, the title is guaranteed. The information about the title on any parcel is more clear. It's listed in what we call a parcel register, so the ownership and any outstanding interests that are current to that real time in property online is listed there. The government guarantees the title instead of a citizen having to have a lawyer certify title each time a property is changed hands. We have eliminated the need to have that historic search done. There are all kinds of spin-off benefits to the new system, like the ability to share information and link land information in property online to other relevant data sets such as Crown lands, information about property assessment, outstanding tax balances. So the benefits are far-reaching. The key ones are around the guarantee of title and the full electronic access to information for lawyers, and the citizens benefit indirectly from that.
Can someone off the street go in and access the property online, or do you have to have a system for doing that, or is it possible for someone to access that through the proper channels?
Yeah, property online is a service that is provided to a whole range of different groups of users. In order to access that service, depending on the user group, you have to meet certain qualifications and requirements. The lawyers being the highest, the group with the highest privileges. An individual citizen can purchase the service of property online, but are unlikely to, because the service is really for more commercial users who are accessing who have the need to access land information on a daily basis to close property transactions. So options that are available to a citizen would be still walking into any one of our 18 land registration offices and they have access to a similar system. It's not Property Online, but it's what we call Map Library module, and they can certainly search the same information that they would have always been able to search in the public land registry by using that system. We also have other options such as calling in and getting individual information per parcel, and they pay a fee over the phone to get that information. Most citizens find that the service to walk into the land registration office is most feasible for them because they're only paying $5.94 for 3.5 hours of search time in the land registry. So that typically is the option people choose.
I can understand that's pretty reasonable, and indeed would hopefully in that time they could find what they want. I think you've already answered this question, but I'd say I just got some of this basic stuff I want to get out of the way. How many staff are employed in the land registry system?
Approximately at the land programs, the head office, the Registrar General's office, there are 13 full-time equivalent FTEs. Within the land registry offices, I don't have an up-to-date figure on that. I would say that there are approximately 100 to 110 people who are delivering the services through the land registration offices. And within our IT section, there would be 3 dedicated staff who look after the day-to-day production support for the infrastructure, for the IT infrastructure. And then there would be a sprinkling of resources throughout the department that support the program, the service delivery, and even the data center would certainly have a portion of resources there who are supporting the protection of our data and our applications and the infrastructure.
You have a breakdown of the staff members and who basically what the structure is in the registry?
Well, in the...
Or can you provide it? Maybe that'd be easier.
I can really speak more to the land programs office. Within the land programs head office, which is really the Registrar General's office, there are approximately 3 staff who are directly involved in the policy regulation development with the Registrar General. There are 2 staff members who work full-time with Department of Natural Resources on the conversion of properties into land titles, the conversion of those Crown lands. We have a staff member who supports the RG, a legal services person, an administrative assistant who supports the director role and the overall program office. We also have 2 positions who look after the registry data quality and a property online administration, which is a very important component of the RG's office as well. So roughly 13 is divided up in those areas. Within the land registration offices, I can't give you a breakdown of the numbers, but we have registrars who oversee the document registration and applications for a given county, which is the land registration jurisdiction. We have senior property mappers who oversee the work of the staff who process parcel description applications, subdivisions, and anything to do with the boundaries of properties. And then we also have land registration officers who process documents on a day-to-day basis and applications for registration, and property mappers as well who do the work related to parcel descriptions and any documents related to extent of title. So there are about 4 areas within the land registry offices, areas of expertise or divisions of work.
One thing is that I don't know if this is correct or not. They say if an error is made in the registry when say, a lawyer or law firm registers a piece of property, and if there's an error made at that time, how difficult is it to correct it? Or is it correctable?
There are lots of provisions in the Land Registration Act and regulations to correct errors that are made in the land registry. If recording was removed incorrectly, we have a prescribed form that allows the authorized user or the person submitting the document to correct that error. We have rectifications. Rectifications can be done by the local county registrar, by the Registrar General, and by the lawyer. So it could be a lawyer who made the error, him or herself. It could be a lawyer representing a client on a subsequent transaction who notices an error who then initiates a correction to that error. So there are lots of provisions in the Act and regulations to correct errors in a timely way in the land registry system.
And you said earlier, and it was my understanding, that there's a guarantee of title. So if I bought a piece of property and someone else, and I had this registered and was all done to the book as it should be, and with all the supporting documents, and then someone comes along and says, I have a title to this land, here's a deed I had 400 years ago. How does that work?
Well, without getting into the legal specifics, because it would certainly depend on a lot of information around that transaction, anyone who suffers a loss as a result of relying on the title register once a parcel is moved to the new system, and they can prove that they have suffered a loss, are able to be compensated. And then the way that liability is divided up is the lawyer who certifies the title either on the initial migration or on subsequent revisions to that title, that land title's parcel, is on the hook for any error or omission that he or she caused for 10 years, either after the migration date or after the revision date. If there's an error or omission caused by a lawyer's negligence, and that error is not uncovered until after the 10 years, and if the error results in someone suffering a loss, the government will pay out compensation for that loss. And then within the 10-year period, the government is actually on the hook for any staff or system errors.
Has there been any of those cases that have come through sort of to test the system on that so far?
Well, we're still well within the 10-year period where the government is not responsible for the lawyer's errors. We've had, I believe, 2 or 3 fairly small claims as a result of staff or system errors, and the amount is totals under $40,000 since the implementation in the first county. And again, any other errors or omissions made by lawyers that would result in a loss within this 10-year period would be handled by the Lawyers Insurance of Nova Scotia for the lawyers' insurance.
So basically the system seems to be at this point working quite well, and the guarantee hasn't been a real issue then?
No, and the reason we chose the 10-year period is because history tells us in similar jurisdictions that real estate claims resulting from errors made in real estate transactions tend to be uncovered in that 10 years, and that's why we chose the 10-year period.
Okay. And what would happen if within the 10-year period if a law firm ceased to be, or somebody moved away from the province and wasn't accessible to get compensation from if there was an error like that made? Would the province then pick up the bill for it?
No, I do believe that the Lawyers Insurance in Nova Scotia and the Bar Society would still be responsible for an error that a lawyer made who is now no longer practicing.
Okay. Would it be possible, not today, I know this, provide the committee with detailed spending reports on what's been spent, and this estimate to be spent on this complete project? Provide that to the committee in the...
I defer to Mr. Malloy.
Mr. Malloy.
Yes.
Great, thank you. During the last budget, which was passed, there's been a directive put out by the Minister of Finance to cut costs. How will that affect? Will there be any vacancies not filled this year in this land registry that might have been filled in other circumstances, or other cutbacks that you've managed to achieve to help the overall financial situation in the province?
Mr. Malloy.
Thank you. Yes, and this year the budget process did cause us to review all staffing requirements, and as I guess the ebbs and tides of system developments impacts a variety of our programs. I think we did reduce 2 FTEs in the land registration area out of the 100 and some that we were talking about. The demand, though, in Service Nova Scotia is such that we were able to move resources around wherever the demands are, and we have a clear agreement with the Nova Scotia Barrister Society that, and Nancy could talk in more detail on this, but there are turnaround times for processing transactions, and if at any point in time we are in jeopardy of not meeting those timelines, we can move resources in to help us make sure we're successful. The big benefit, if I could just speak to this quickly, with the new system, is there's something called the provincial queue. And the provincial queue allows us to put work into a holding area, for lack of a better term. And where you have some offices that are really, really busy and other offices that are less so, we're actually able to do work in Bedeck, for example, that was a transaction that might have been initiated in another office. So it's actually able to enable us to spread the workload more evenly throughout the province and ensure that the smaller offices that at times aren't that busy, that they're able to keep a nice even workflow for all employees across Nova Scotia.
That sounds very positive. Lots of times that can't happen, so I think that's good planning.
Yeah.
Just in the general process, when are all your programs in place and everything that and up to what you consider to be sort of the final draft, so that I'm probably not asking this question properly, but to ensure that your computer programs and the registry programs, are you satisfied that those are up to where they should be now, or do you think there might have to be more capital infusion in that to maybe fine-tune it better or to improve it in some way?
There's always opportunities to improve technology, and we work in partnership with, as I indicated earlier, with the Barrister Society. We're implementing and have implemented fairly high standards of quality assurance and audit provisions. We're constantly reviewing transactions, and every time we do find an error within the system, we look to the technology to be able to improve the technology to ensure that that type of error can't happen in the future. Another big benefit from the system is in the old day, I shouldn't say the old day, but 10 years ago, the lawyer would have to fill out all the data on every form, so your name, your address, and all that type of stuff. And there'd be a lot of mistakes made in that. Now, when he brings up an individual land parcel, the system pre-populates the vast majority of the data in there, which allows not only the system to be utilized from an efficiency standpoint, but helps significantly reduce the number of errors, even in minor things like address and postal code and that type of things, which we don't want any of those types of errors in our system. So we're using the technology day in and day out to continually improve the process, to minimize the errors, and to improve the efficiency of the systems.
Thank you. Your time has elapsed now, Mr. Caldwell. I'd like to turn the floor over to Mr. McMaster for the Conservative Caucus for the next 20 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My first questions will be about the integrity of land records. And in my course of work as an MLA, I've come across one person in particular who had an issue around incorrectly recorded documentation. And I can only imagine all the details with land and with doing surveys and land registry numbers, going back over 100 years in some cases. More than one person making a claim to a piece of land. So it would be easy to expect there could be some clerical errors, or there could be the assessment that was made would have been made based on the information available, which might not have been ideal. And then, of course, there's other agencies that I think are involved, like natural resources and municipalities, that add another element to the integrity of the information that's used. Is there a paper backup for every electronic record? And if so, could you explain a little bit about how that works, where it's kept?
Ms. Saunders.
Yes, when we go into any county and what we call convert the land records, which really involves a number of different ways that we do that, the historic bound books, which are the books that tend to go up to around 1930s, 1940s, those books, because we don't like to tamper with the bound historic books, we digitize the images from microfilm that has already, in most cases, has already been produced for those historic books. For the documents that are more recent, typically the most recent 60-year documents are typically in binder type breakable books that are much more easier to scan en masse. So we do scan those records from paper. And then the historic plans and the newer plans, we as well do large format plan scanning using the paper copies. We are very much responsible for all of those records. They actually are the foundation for the certificate of title that lawyers provide in the new system. And we pay a lot of attention to that. So when we go into any county to convert those records, it's really an exercise of doing a complete inventory of every document that was ever recorded in that county and making sure that that document is linked to the indices that lawyers use and searchers use to find the document. So it's a process that we hold as very important. It's probably one of the most important data integrity processes that we have in place. And that's currently overseen by the RG's office because it's so important. And in terms of the backup, we not only have an image database that holds all of the documents that have been submitted electronically or have been scanned in-house since 2002, because we no longer keep paper since 2002. And as well, all of the documents that have been scanned, all the historic scanning, is held in what we call an image repository. So the image database is backed up. It's also sent off-site. It's also recorded on tape and stored off-site. The historic bound documents, we have an agreement with the Public Archives to hold those, and they take over the custodianship of those historic documents when we complete the digitization of the microfilm and move them out of the vaults. The paper documents that are in the breakable books are also kept in a proper facility with climate-controlled, environment-controlled atmosphere to protect those records for a very long time, as well as the paper plan. So we have the paper backup. In most cases, we have a microfilm backup, and we also have backed up our image repository of all those legal records.
When people use the land registry system online, can they have access to that information? Like if they click on a property, once they've paid the fee, do they get to see those documents that are already scanned?
Absolutely. The documents that are still under that had been recorded under the traditional registry, they are linked directly to the grant or grantee index. So you would just click on the image when you do your search, and the documents that have been either converted or scanned in or e-submitted into the Land Titles Registry are all available in the parcel register. There's a tab that's called View Image. So anyone walking into the Land Registry would be able to view those, or all the users who have access to Property Online also have access to those images. So as soon as we load those images into Property Online, they're available in real time.
Great, thank you. Can you explain the involvement of municipalities in the land registry system?
Ms. Saunders.
Okay. Wow. Well, we actually work quite closely with the municipalities in terms of the subdivision approval process. The municipalities, of course, have the authority to approve subdivisions, either municipalities directly or planning authorities that are made up of that represent multiple municipalities. So the land registration offices are very much involved in that process, receiving the plans before, sometimes even before tentative approval, assigning pending parcel numbers to those plans so that municipalities can utilize that information in their building permit and urban planning tracking systems. And then we also work closely with the development officers on all of those requirements for subdivisions under the Land Titles Registry, the trigger, the subdivision trigger, and making sure that citizens and surveyors who are submitting plans meet all of those requirements. So we have a fairly close working relationship with municipalities. We also supply a lot of information to municipalities relating to properties. The property records database, which is really maintained through the land registry, and it's all that information about property linked to assessment accounts, information about ownership and address and all that, is shared with the Property Valuation Services Corporation, and in turn passed on to municipalities. So there's a very close link with municipalities, both through urban planning, the subdivision process, and the taxation process.
Okay. And that would be true, I guess, for historical as well. Are deeds kept at the municipal level, or is that something, not any? No.
No, well, all the documents associated with title and interest in land have really been required to be deposited, recorded in the land registry since the beginning of the system in 1749. So the official location for registry for documents about land interests or that convey land interests is the registry.
Okay, thank you. What about Department of Natural Resources? Can you explain their involvement in the land registry system?
Well, Department of Natural Resources, of course, oversees and manages the Crown land for the province of Nova Scotia. And what I mean by Crown land is ungranted Crown land and reconveyed Crown land, so land that DNR has acquired back to protect for the citizens of Nova Scotia or to hold for the benefit of citizens of Nova Scotia. So under the Land Registration Act, Natural Resources has the same benefits that a citizen has in terms of being able to convert the property that they oversee or that they manage to land titles in order to protect it against further claim or new claims that may be started by squatters' rights or whatever. So we have worked since we implemented the system with Department of Natural Resources to bring all of those Crown lands, ungranted and reconveyed, we're starting with, into the land title system to ensure that the public lands are protected. And as I mentioned earlier, there are 2 staff within the Land Programs Office, the RG's office, who are working directly with DNR to get that done. We currently have 17 counties where all of the ungranted Crown land has been moved into land titles and protected.
And without having to go into too much detail, would you be able to explain generally the process for amendments and changes to property records?
Sorry, the process for?
The process for making amendments or changes to property records.
Okay. Well, in the land title system, once a parcel moves into land titles, authorized lawyers are the only group of real estate professionals who are permitted to make revisions to the parcel register. So any revisions on title, what we call benefits or burdens, things like easements, are only able to be updated by authorized lawyers. There are some recorded interests that are able to be recorded by other groups. For instance, lenders are permitted to record security interests or release their security interests on land titles parcels. And government agencies such as Workers' Compensation Board, there are some documents that are only recorded documents that are permitted to be recorded by other agencies besides authorized lawyers. For the most part, authorized lawyers revise the register and do the recorded interest additions and deletions.
Okay. There was a case that, as I referenced earlier, and this is probably something that's typical, it's happened around the province, but where you'd have an original land grant back in the 1800s. The land would have been passed down through the family. Years ago, there might not have been real strict or a real, on behalf of the family, there wasn't probably a great effort to try to maintain ownership of the land because it was theirs and they considered it theirs, and time marched on, and we come to the present day, and but to do it properly, to properly pass land down through a family, what would be the requirement to do that?
I'd like to refer that to Norman Hill.
Yeah. Mr. Hill.
That does happen quite often, that especially in rural areas of the province, that land is transferred by will or sometimes by family tradition without the formality of wills or deeds. And how that relates to this land registration system is that in the event that a property like that is to be migrated or brought into the new system, a lawyer would, just as in the old system, would have to be able to certify title to that property to say that the family owns it. But we don't require that there necessarily be paper title in order to do that. If the lawyer can certify that there's, through proper evidence, affidavits from the family members, whatever, if he can satisfy himself that the family has good, what we call possessory title to that land, that they've occupied the farm or cut wood on the woodlot, whatever, for the requisite period of time, then he can certify title to the system based on possession. And we accept that. The Act provides for certification based on adverse possession. That property can be brought into the system, and the lawyer and subsequently the province will guarantee that title in the same way as we do for paper title. So we very much, the system very much anticipates that type of situation you describe.
Okay, thank you. In this case, there was a property that, and probably it was the case that somebody made a claim on it, and I believe the claim was given to these new people, and the heirs of the property lost title to it for a period of time. So I can only presume in a case like that that the people who made the claim on the land that got possession of it were able to prove to the department that they would be able to use that land. I don't think of the best way to explain this. They had no previous title to it. They had no connection to it, but they were able to gain title to the land. And I think in this case it was considered Crown land at that point because the original heirs had not kept up to date with documentation. So I think that's probably what happened, that land was given to somebody else before the heirs, the original owners of the land, could lay claim to it or continue to lay claim to it. Is that something that happens?
I can't comment on the specific case, and I'm not familiar with it, but that type of thing certainly can happen and happens quite frequently, that there's the paper title is in the name of one person, but a different party or family has actually possessed the land. So, in fact, inevitably, always in cases where there's a claim based on adverse possession, there's some kind of paper title somewhere, or quite often there is, maybe way back at the original Crown grant a couple hundred years ago, but there's some kind of paper title which often just kind of peters out. People haven't recorded proper deeds and it just fades away. Mm-hmm. But it's not, it's perfectly possible to have one party which has some kind of paper title to the property, but a different party who has certifiable possessory title to the property. And that property can be brought into the system. It can be certified to the system based on that possessory title. Again, I don't know the specific situation you're talking about and couldn't comment on it if I did, but it's conceivable that you could have two competing titles to the same property, in which, and if we have a situation where a party has good paper title on the record and another party that has possessory title, and the property is brought into the system based, say, on the possessory title, and the province lawyers have certified title to that property, and then another party says that they have paper title, well, that would be a situation where there would probably be a claim made, and we would have to determine whether that person who lost their title was entitled, or if someone bought, for instance, from the paper title holder, and in reliance, and another party bought based on a reliance on our certification of title, then we may have, it's conceivable we would have to compensate one party or the other. I can't say in your particular example whether that would happen, but it's conceivable that would be a situation where we would have to compensate a party.
Okay, that's very good. That helps to clarify. Appreciate that. I guess a piece of land, and I hope I'm staying on because I realize there's more than one department that's involved in this, and if I'm straying, I apologize, but if something becomes ungranted Crown land, I guess that essentially means that the province has taken ownership of it, and it's no longer granted to any individual.
So I'm not sure what you mean when you say becomes ungranted Crown land.
Yeah.
Some parts of the province have never been granted. Those remain Crown lands. Other parts have been granted by the Crown at some point to a private individual, but have subsequently come back into the Crown, either being deeded back or they could have escheated to the Crown, which means they returned to Crown ownership by operation of law. There's a number of ways, or could have been expropriated. There's a number of ways it can get back into the Crown. I'm not sure I understand what your question is.
Well, I think what happened in the case, and the reason I like using this case is kind of it helps me to keep a train of thought of, and it's what could happen to people in the province. But in this case, something became, it was originally granted to the original settler.
Yes.
And then it became ungranted Crown land because there was a lack of documentation by the family of that original settler. And then later on, the Crown released interest in the land. So it, in other words, the Crown was no longer laying claim to the land. So it's kind of a confusing situation, but it's very important to people
I think
who...
I understand what you're talking about. There is a situation provided for legislatively whereby the Crown can release interest in land to which the title is uncertain to allow a citizen to make to quiet the title under the Quiet Titles Act or whatever, but or certify title by adverse possession to our system. If there's some question of Crown ownership, there is a process. It's quite a long, involved, and cumbersome process, but there is a process whereby the Crown can be asked to release their interest and will do so if they don't feel they have any legitimate claim to the land. So there is a process for that, and I expect that's the process you're referring to.
Yes, yeah. And I guess who is there to provide direction for people in Nova Scotia that might encounter this situation? Is it something that can be done at a municipal level? I saw in some historical documentation that a person was advised to contact a land registration office at their local municipality. Would that be the place for people to go, or should they go to come to Halifax here, or somebody to speak with somebody here or with your department?
Well, when someone's referred to the land registration office, that would be one of the registry offices that Ms. Saunders referred to. There's 18 of them in the province. They're not municipal offices.
Okay.
They're provincial offices in the individual counties.
Okay.
Often in the sort of the shire town of each county.
Okay.
And that's the land registration office. That's where a person goes to get land information. But in terms of, to answer what I think was your question, which was how does a person get advice as to where to go? Well, land registration offices don't generally give advice as to how to clear the title to your land or how to deal with the land registration system. We refer people to private lawyers to do that. And that's normally where advice as to how to proceed under the Land Registration Act comes from. But we give people that sort of direction, but the Land Registration Office nor the Registrar General's Office isn't in the business of giving legal advice. That we leave to lawyers.
Okay. Has the department ever considered coming up with a checklist or a little guidebook to help people? Because I know people can avail the services of a lawyer or legal representation, but is there a way that we could be making it easier for people to, like if they have issues like this, to make claims, something that would help the average person understand what they need to do? Because you can imagine the emotional situation of a family owning a piece of property, it's suddenly disappearing on them, and then being told, well, just talk to a lawyer, and because it's a complicated issue, and I'm sure that's why the lawyers are involved. But is there some way we could make it easier and more of a positive experience for somebody if they encounter this situation, to be able to approach government and feel maybe a little more confident that if they have legitimate interest in the land, and it is legitimate, that they can see the light at the end of the tunnel?
Mr. McMaster, your time has elapsed, so I think that might be a longer answer than a couple of seconds. So could we perhaps bring that question back in the second round? I'd like to turn the floor over to Mr. Epstein for the NDP Caucus. And I am sorry for interrupting.
That's okay. Thank you very much. I should confess right away that I'm a veteran of the registry system. When I was an articled clerk in 1973, I learned to search titles under my principal, a man named Richard Weldon, who was at one point a member of Dartmouth City Council and then a member of this legislature. And he took us to the basement of the law courts buildings after a regular work day. We would go search titles, and that's where we learned to do it. We learned the idea of going back to find a good root of title and then search the title forward in these books that Ms. Saunders referred to. I should confess as well that I actually liked doing title searches, and I liked the old system. I liked the smell of the paper, and I liked the hunt that was involved in trying to make sure that there was a good chain of title that could be brought forward. It was a link with history. It as well involved the problematic skills of reading old handwriting, old styles of handwriting, and getting used to the style of description that was used early on. And it brought us into touch, of course, with the original land grants and the maps that were associated with it, and you saw people's wills and you saw the details of their lives unfold historically. It was in fact quite a fascinating part of what I still think is some of the essence of law. That is an understanding of the history of your community. That said, though, I do have some respect for the new system, and although I've been on the non-practicing list of the Bar Society for a number of years, my contact with the new system has been mostly as a client, that is, buying and selling real estate. So I've had at least some experience of that and have come to know it. But I haven't done it as a practitioner, and so I have, I think, some little wariness, I guess, about it, and like many people, I'm trying to understand a bit about it. So at some point, I do have maybe some detailed questions, but I'd like to start maybe with a bit of overview. I don't think I heard what it cost to actually set up this system in the first place. As I understand it, there was an initial investment, and I did hear, I think, that the ongoing costs are recovered, so that there's not an actual outlay from year to year. But was there an initial cost involved in setting the system up?
Ms. Saunders, I think you're taking this one. Yeah.
I was the project director since 2004. I wasn't around, I wasn't responsible for the budget when the project was first launched. The information that I recall is that the entire implementation, including the operation, over a 7-year period, the project operation itself, the acquisition of the software, the hardware, the implementation of that, and all of the expenses related to training, all the different groups, et cetera, was around $14 million over a 7-year period. That's what was approved by Cabinet in 2001, I do believe. And around half of that was tangible capital asset funding that was put directly into the system, the infrastructure, and the software, the hardware, software, and infrastructure.
Yes. Of that amount, I take it that's an amount that wouldn't be recovered from the ongoing fees that come in that are paid by the users of the system.
No,
so
not directly. No.
That was just an upfront investment.
It was an upfront investment.
Okay,
yes.
That's fine. I guess what I would start by wondering is, I've heard you saying that the move to the new system, which I tend to think of as the Torrens system, it's the term that I've heard before, that overall it seems to have been a good thing to have done. And so I'm just wondering if I can hear the summation again about what it is that was essentially good about this new system. What are the main virtues?
Well, one of the main virtues would be the guarantee of title. So providing citizens with an ability to be compensated for any loss in the system instead of having to go through a lengthy and costly title dispute in the court system. The system provides for a much more efficient and effective process for closing property transactions. The efficiencies created through the electronic processes, not only just the access to all of the information to do the work in an expedient fashion, but also the ability to submit the transactions directly from the lawyer's desk. So that has reduced the cost and the time involved in doing subsequent transactions. We have eliminated that cost, that repeated cost of the historic search. So in the old system, as you recall, each person that acquired a property would have to have the opinion of a lawyer. The opinion would have to be repeated. So if a purchaser was hiring a lawyer to look after their purchase of a property, that lawyer would be repeating the historic search and providing their opinion to that one person. Whereas the new system, the lawyer's certificate is really to the government, to the person, and really to everyone impacted today and in the future in terms of the property transactions on that parcel.
Yes.
So those are the key things, but there are all kinds of other benefits in terms of some of the savings that Mr. Malloy mentioned earlier around operational savings, because we can share work around the province. We have an electronic queue where work can be balanced and shared among offices. We have created significant savings in the reduction in space because we no longer require those specialized vault spaces to store and maintain all of the microfilm and paper. Basically, we started with 22 million pieces of paper in our registries around the province that we were paying to store and provide access to. So significant differences in just that type of cost in running the system. And then the inherent issues with the namespace system, which again leads to some of those issues around title disputes, because you know, there are 15 John McDonald's in Cape Breton, or there's 50 of them. There's all kinds of issues with the namespace system that led to difficult title work and some flaws in some of the decisions made around the assessment of title.
Yes. Is it fair then to say that the parcel-based system rather than the namespace system is perhaps less susceptible to the possibilities of fraud? Is that also a point?
Absolutely. The implementation of electronic submission and being able to kind of shut down the opportunity for people to walk into a registry with a doctored up paper document, that has substantially reduced our exposure to fraud, to real estate fraud, certainly against the system in Nova Scotia.
Yes. I was interested in your point that it might be more efficient if there actually were a claim to process a claim against the government guarantee than it would be to process a claim against the lawyer's insurance. Has that in fact been the case? I think you've said so far that there have only been a few cases where there have been claims against the system so far.
Yeah, I think the only reason why the only reason why we've had the instances where government has paid out compensation is those were particular cases where it was a staff error or a system error. So we are on the hook for those. Any other error that was caused by a lawyer error or omission in the title certificate or in the revision of the parcel register is the responsibility of the lawyer's insurance in Nova Scotia for the first 10 years. So those are automatically the responsibility of the Bar Society or the lawyer's insurance.
Yes. Can you expand a bit about the idea of what the provincial guarantee of land ownership actually means? Can I just hear a bit more about what that essential idea is?
Well, really what it means is anyone who has suffered a loss as a result of relying on a parcel register. An example may be there's a parcel of land that the easement burden. One example may be the parcel is burdened by a private easement over the back part. There's no real physical evidence of the easement, but it's a valid easement. And during the migration of that property, the easement was not shown on the parcel register. And it was clearly, the information was clearly available in the required search period for the authorized lawyer. And later on, a person purchased that property without the easement noted. They would have suffered a loss because their property is actually encumbered by an easement, and it wasn't shown on the register. So that would be presented to the Registrar General's office. There would be an investigation around was that a lawyer error, was that a government error, and there would be compensation paid if there was a loss sustained.
Yes. Okay, I think I understand that.
That's one example.
Okay. Can I just switch to another point? Various pieces of provincial legislation ask that certain, I would say, burdens on land that I wouldn't necessarily have thought of as traditionally being interests in land are nonetheless to be recorded in the Registry of Deeds. And I have in mind things like, well, of course, subdivisions, but then development agreements are another example. Heritage designations are another example that occur to me. So these kinds of provincially imposed requirements are seen as essentially worthy of public notification. And and the registry is seen as the system. Have all of these been migrated and included? How are these incorporated in the title information that you have in the system?
Ms. Saunders.
During the historic search before the migration from the old system to the new, during that period of time that the lawyer is required to search, any of those types of interests absolutely would have to be shown in the parcel register, depending on the type of interest that is enabled by that instrument. It could be listed as a recorded interest or it could be listed as a burden, and it would be up to the lawyer to determine whether, which type of interest it is. After the parcel is in the new system, any new interests coming in on that parcel, in order to be valid interests, have to be recorded in the parcel register. So yes, those interests would be, in order to be defendable and be valid interests, they would have to be recorded in the register.
Yes, they showed up on your system. And what about judgments? How are judgments treated in this system, if at all? I mean, it was always part of the traditional paper search of a title that one would try to check to see if any judgments had been entered against a vendor.
Judgments are still done in a names-based role. During the consultation that we did province-wide around the Land Registration Act and the proposed Land Registration Act, it was the desire of judgment debtors and judgment creditors, I should say, and the practicing lawyers to keep judgments in a names-based role so that they wouldn't be required to record them against parcels in every county and try to proactively add them to parcels that debtors would acquire in the future. So we retained the judgment role as a names-based role. So they're still recorded in a judgment role, and they have a 3-year judgment renewal process. So we went from a 20-year judgment to a 5-year judgment with the ability to renew that judgment 3 times.
Oh, very interesting. Thank you. I think my colleague, Mr. Smith, has some questions.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. This is your lucky day. You've got 2 non-practicing lawyers on this side, and I just wanted to tell you that I was with legal aid for my last 34 years and just got elected in October. But when your program came in, I jumped for joy because it meant that all my relatives and friends who used to get me to do their title searches, I didn't have to do them anymore because I wasn't one of the trained lawyers. I wasn't one of the trained lawyers to do that, and legal aid lawyers, I think there's very few of them that have that specialized training to now work the new system. So from my point of view, it was a real benefit to see you fellows come on stream, but the local lawyers initially were very disgruntled, unhappy, didn't like it, that kind of thing. Was that just sort of the knee-jerk reaction to change, or have they settled down and are lawyers now happier with the system?
Ms. Saunders?
Whoever wants it.
Yeah, there may be someone else.
We rolled the Land Registration Act, or the implementation out by county first and then by region. So Colchester County was the first county to deal with the system. We first implemented it there in 2003. So absolutely, there were a number of things that would have had an impact on lawyers taking some time to get used to the system. The initial system didn't have all the efficiencies and enhancements that it did, for instance, when we completed the rollout. There was a fairly significant learning curve, and although lawyers were provided with mandatory education and a lot of technical training around using the system, it was a huge change for lawyers. So there were a number of there was an uncomfortable feeling around all those changes, having to use a computer, some of them for the first time, for instance. That quickly changed once we moved into other counties. Even the fees started to level out very quickly once lawyers working in an electronic system could work in any county. So all of those initial problems or things that were raised as issues quickly did settle down. We don't hear that much anymore about those kinds of issues.
Okay. You had told us in your initial talk, I think, that there were 18 land registries in Nova Scotia. did we lose any with the transfer? Are there still 18? Because I know there were some sort of sub-registries and that kind of thing. Are they all still intact, or?
Ms. Saunders.
Yes, we started out with the implementation of the Land Registration Act with 18 county jurisdictions, and we still have 18 county jurisdictions.
Okay. And I've always been interested. You talk about one of the advantages of being kind of the downside because you don't have to have the paper on site and that sort of thing. Where did all these books go?
I mentioned earlier the public archives take over custodianship of all the historic bound books as we scan the records. So for 4 of our land registration offices now, the historic bound books are presently at the public archives on the corner of University and Roby. And the more recent paper documents that we scanned from those breakable books, as we move to a new site where there is no vault, those paper documents are stored with Secure Canada at 10 Regent Lake Boulevard in the Regent Lake Business Park.
Okay, so just in dead storage, basically.
In climate-controlled storage, proper
Right.
storage that we're able, and an inventory system where we can gain access to those very quickly.
They wouldn't be accessible by the public, though?
No.
No. Now, the ones at the archives, would they be available to researchers and that thing?
The original hand-scribed bound books are protected from further public use, and the microfilm is available for public use
Okay.
at the public
All right.
archive.
You said that 4 of your registries were sort of fully electronic now. Is Antigonish one of those?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Okay, I just wanted to, how did we get into this? What prompted the sort of long-term planning, and why did we go down this road initially? Who was asking for it?
Well, actually, the vision for a land title system in Nova Scotia was actually born a long time ago. I would say a few decades ago, even with the formation of the Council of Maritime Premiers, who were really overseeing the completion of provincial property mapping and geographic information holdings and services and mapping services, et cetera. That was really where I would say the first big push towards preparing for a land title system began, was in the early 70s. And in the late 90s, there was a lot of momentum from all professionals and users of land information to look at the antiquated registry system and look at all of the related agencies and government levels of government and private sector who use that information, and look at how can we modernize that. So in 1997-98, there was a process that took place called the business area analysis that involved representatives from all stakeholder groups who would be interested in land information in general, but particularly focused on the land registry. And what came out of that was a real kind of groundswell from the stakeholders to really look into the modernization of the land registry and to move away from the traditional antiquated registry of deeds. And some of what happened before that was, of course, all across Canada, most jurisdictions are already land titles. Ontario had moved from a traditional registry system to land titles, and New Brunswick, just before Nova Scotia, had implemented a land title system. So there was a lot of momentum from that as well, and a lot of lessons learned.
Ms. Saunders, I'm going to interrupt you if I could, because the time has elapsed for that round of questions, although Mr. Caldwell, you may want to continue to hear the answer to that question, but I turn it over to you. Our last round of questions will be 14 minutes each.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go on a little bit different track here. You indicated that it's less likely now for someone to fraudulently put information in to gain property or whatever the case is. I've dealt with a constituent, and they had a right-of-way issue that was brought forward. And I know you can't talk about specific cases, and I wouldn't ask you to do that. But there was a drawing created by the person that wanted to land and give it to the lawyer and said, you know, this is a good little drawing here. And indeed, the drawing isn't. From what you can tell, if you looked from the information I've seen from the deeds that the individual had, it's caused a great deal of difficulty. How is that addressed if that's proven that this is fraudulent document? How's that handled?
I would like to refer to Norman.
Mr. Hill?
Thank you. I'm not entirely sure I understand the specifics of the case. I'll have to talk in a little more general way about that. But what you described was a sketch, by the sounds of it, which doesn't sound like it was a registry document.
No.
And so I don't know in that example how that would come to create a problem with the system. I mean, if someone there's always the risk of that type of fraud. If somebody, for instance, we talked a little earlier about titles based on adverse possession. Well, it's conceivable, I suppose, that somebody could falsely swear affidavits as to possession or produce the type of document, an old sketch or an old document that might substantiate a claim for adverse possession, and that might be false. I mean, that is a risk of certifying title based on adverse possession, that there can be the evidence on which it's based can be false. I mean, that's a risk that's inherent in that type of title, and that's but when the system was instituted, that was determined to be an acceptable risk in order to allow the very many titles in this province that could only be certified based on adverse possession to come into the system. So yes, certifying titles based on possession, certifying titles based on anything other than properly recorded documents does by its nature have some inherent risk, but it's a necessary risk in order for the system to work in a province like Nova Scotia where perfect paper title is just not always a possibility. I don't know if that addresses your question. I'm only trying to address it in a general way, but certainly there is a risk that whenever titles are based on anything but proper recorded documents, that someone could falsify title. That is a risk.
What happens if indeed that's proven that the individual did falsify documents? What process happens then?
Well, apart from, I mean, obviously there's elements of criminal law that come into effect there. If someone has committed a fraud, well, they could be reported to the police. In terms of our system, if a title is registered in the system, if a title is migrated or converted into the system, and we're guaranteeing the title, we draw a curtain over anything in the past, and we guarantee the title. If somebody, in reliance on that parcel register, which says that Joe Blow owns that piece of land, if someone relies on that and it turns out to be an error, that's a situation that may give rise to the use of the compensation provisions under the Act. So the Act does provide for compensation to an individual that's lost an interest as a result of reliance on the parcel register. That may be a situation where that would arise.
And if indeed, say that did happen and everything was a perfect world, and they come and say, well, this was either fraud or was a mistake or whatever the case was, how does the compensation work? Does it work on the value of the property that has been lost by the individual? How do you establish that?
It's based on the value of the interest lost. Yes, it's not based on assessment necessarily, but it would be like any time someone makes a claim, a legal claim, alleging they've suffered a loss, you would have to quantify that loss. So, we would have to investigate the claim and determine what was fair compensation in that particular situation. There's no formula for how the compensation is calculated. It's based on, I believe, without consulting the Act, I believe the provision is something to the effect of the value of the interest lost. So if a person loses an interest in land, that would have to be quantified in the same way that it would be in a claim in the courts. You would have to demonstrate the value of what you lost.
Who would make that decision?
Well, in terms of adjusting with the party who's making the claim, it would be me. I would have to look at the claim and determine what the value was.
And how would you do that?
Based on whatever evidence the person could provide, I suppose. It would depend on there's just so many circumstances I could conceive of. But I assume that evidence like the sales of recent properties in the area, the same way you'd ever calculate the value of land. I mean, you could calculate the value of an interest lost based on those sorts of calculations. It would just, we'd just try to come up to a fair resolution of it.
So you really don't have any really laid down, defined way to do that?
Not really. No, in the same way that the courts, who traditionally have always arbitrated such sorts of disputes, there's no hard and fast rule for how these things are calculated. You have to determine the value of the loss and compensate it.
Yeah, but it's one individual doing it's a little bit different in the court, because then lawyers would make arguments on both sides, and the judge would make some kind of a determination based on all the information they had. But when it's an individual or a department making this, and probably you would consult with your deputy minister, or whoever else you would had to, before you would make the final decision. But there should really be a system for doing that, shouldn't there? Should be, use appraisal for some independent appraiser or something that would come to a decision. I would think, especially if it's a government department, there should be some laid down rules on exactly how you would conduct that.
It's a fair point. There is no provision in the legislation for a formula for calculating a loss. There's no provision in the Act for a hard and fast formula for calculating that.
Is there a policy in the department for doing that?
With respect to claims, this is a relatively new regime, obviously, and there's, as Ms. Saunders referred to, there's been very few claims, fortunately, and so how claims are dealt with is very much a work in progress. There's been so few that we haven't had to come up with a complex sort of regime of how we deal with them. I mean, they're dealt with much the same way any other claims against the province are dealt with. I mean, we use the same sort of system. We use the Department of Justice lawyers to defend claims and to give us legal opinions on claims. But there's no we haven't had to institute a very rigorous protocol for dealing with claims, because there's been so few, and so that's very much a living thing as to how we deal with claims.
I hope there's never any more, but
so do I.
I'm sure you do, and I know your staff, the staff does a really good job, but unfortunately some of these things probably would come from outside the department, probably 99% of them, and it'd be hopefully the lawyers are still around, and hopefully you can still get compensation back for the province. But it seems strange you don't have some kind of a laid down sort of procedure that we do this and this and this and this to arrive at this, and you may be able to make variations in it depending upon the circumstances. But it's sort of I'm looking at it as an MLA, and then I call you up and say, look, I've got a constituent sitting in my office here who's so mad and all upset and all that, you know the routine. Mm-hmm. And I would just like to be able to tell them some kind of a system that you use. If you had a formula that said this is what it is, you use a private appraiser or a couple of appraisers, and you get the value on the property, whatever. I mean, I don't know what the proper mm-hmm. procedure would be. I mean, you could tell me based on your experience a whole lot better than I could, but something that you could say to somebody, this is a process, this is the way it works, and this is what you've got to do in order to access this, and know at the end of the day, which I have no question about, that to be treated fairly. And you know what the opinions are on that when you're dealing with land. And I wouldn't want to be in your shoes in those situations, but I just something that's there and it is sort of laid out that people feel comfortable that at the end of the day that they've been treated well, and I don't doubt they would be by the department. I'm not saying that, but just a process. And then if they figure they're not treated well, even though they probably would have been, then what recourse they have, if any. That sort of thing. Because I see this so much every day in the constituency office, and I'm sure all my colleagues see the same thing, but not with this, but with everything else we deal with.
Well, I'm not sure this adds a whole lot to what I've already said, but not just in this program, but in all across government, there are hundreds of claims every year made against government for any of a wide variety of claims, anything from being run over by a government vehicle to almost anything you could conceive of. And I don't think in any situation there's sort of a hard and fast means of calculating the claim. It's dealt with, much like any sort of claims in the legal system are dealt with. It's evaluated, attempts are made to settle it, and it's hopefully resolved. I mean, I appreciate your point, and it's a good one, but there is no sort of hard and fast formula to calculate the amount of these claims any more than there is in almost any other government program or area where government faces claims. And there's, ours, in many other areas of government, there are a lot more claims, and they're dealt with, the way such claims are dealt with in the legal system. And
one reason I ask that is because the Department of Transportation, if someone gets a broken windshield when construction's going on, is one major headache to get it resolved. One major headache. And typically the individual at the end of the day isn't very happy with what transpired, besides the damage that was done. And the department struggles with trying to make it fair, but yet not being, how should I put it, too generous. Mm-hmm. Because there's a fine balance there. So.
Well, there is, and we are very mindful of that balance. I mean, we're mindful of the fact that while we do have a mandate to compensate parties that have suffered a loss, we're also mindful that this isn't our money we're spending. This is the money, tax money from the citizens of Nova Scotia. So obviously, we have to be extremely careful about paying out claims and make sure we're not being too free with money that's not ours to give out.
I totally appreciate that. It's just that this is a little bit different than a broken windshield in a car. You hit a pothole and you break a wheel and stuff like that we deal with all the time. But this when you start dealing with land, people's eyes sort of light up, and you're dealing with a whole different person at the end of the day. And I've seen that happen many, many times when they think they own something and maybe they don't, or they've lost it and they think they should have it. And you know the routine. You've seen it lots and lots of times. People seem to lose the value of, I guess, common sense at that point. And it's a very emotional thing, especially if it's a piece of property that's been a family for a long time. And it just seems to me you should have a structured system of some kind that you have some leeway with, that you can adjust, with different circumstances, because everyone will probably be different. And I don't misjudge or mistrust your judgment on this. I'm really pleased that I don't have your job, because someday you're going to have some major issues that you're going to have to make decisions on that won't make anybody happy, but you'll have to make them, and that's fine. But that's an issue. How much time do I have left?
Just 30 seconds.
Oh. Can somebody register a document without being a lawyer? Say a plot plan.
That's a depends type of answer. There's certain types of documents can only be registered by authorized users, which are for the most part lawyers. Other types of documents can be, in certain limited circumstances, registered by other parties. For instance, Ms. Saunders referred to financial institutions can register security interests, and in certain circumstances, releases of that. But it depends on the document. Some can be, some only lawyers.
And maybe I can ask you afterwards.
That's right. Thank you very much. And the time has elapsed, so I'm going to turn the floor over to Mr. McMaster for 14 minutes. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Before my last section of questioning had expired, I was asking about, I guess the question I had asked was, have we ever considered a guide or a checklist to be made available for Nova Scotians? And one thing I'd like to mention is, and I've seen it happen, where the department might send out a letter and they'll say, you should contact a lawyer if you want to pursue this further. And I don't think the department is I think what the department is trying to say is get somebody who is familiar with this type of approach who can help you, because it's complicated and it's going to require some legal advice. But when somebody gets that in the mail, sometimes they think it means, oh, the province is picking a fight with me or something, which I don't think that's what it's intended to be at all. And that's, I guess, what my precipitation of asking this question, of trying to make the experience more positive so that people don't get their backs up and they understand there's a process that they can go through. And I'll let you answer the question.
Mr. Hill. Mr. Hill.
Thank you. I appreciate the point you're making, and this is sort of dovetails with the other question about the emotional nature of land, and we're very sensitive to that land issues are more emotional for people than almost anything else. Land that's been in the family for years, or whatever the situation may be. But I'm not sure that the sort of checklist you've described really exists, but certainly in the process of rolling out this land registration program, and as it's gone on and changed and morphed over the years, the government has provided a number of information pamphlets and brochures, and I believe a sample of them might have been given to you in the package that we provided, and there's many, many more like that, and they're written in very plain language, something that's very easy for people to understand. I mean, they weren't sent out to every Nova Scotian or anything, but they're at land registry offices. They're, lawyers pass them out. They're quite accessible information about the way the system works, and people who are involved with the system certainly have access to those types of user-friendly information pamphlets and brochures. And also we have an extremely good website which describes the system and how it works, and through that site there's access to most of the printed material that we can provide. So there is that type of material out there. But we walk a very fine and dangerous line between providing the public with information and giving legal advice, which is, that's something we try very rigorously to avoid doing, because that's just not our role, and we wouldn't be able to do a very good job at that. That is for lawyers. But we certainly do have a number of, I'm not sure if I call them checklists, but certainly a number of pamphlets and information and website pages that provide the type of information that people would need to understand and appreciate how the system works. And quite often when people have a difficulty with the system, we can point them to a particular pamphlet or publication that explains precisely what their problem is. For instance, a very common misconception about this system is that it guarantees where your boundaries are. And it doesn't. That we guarantee title, but we can't say precisely where the property is or what the boundaries are. That's just not possible with the current system to do that. It's something we dream one day of possibly being able to do, and other provinces are able to do that because of more modern survey fabric and that sort of thing. But we can't do that. The members of the public often find that very confusing. Well, you're certifying title, but title to what? And quite often, difficulties people have with the system relate to that. And there's certainly a number of printed materials and materials available on our website that explain that the system doesn't guarantee your boundaries. It only guarantees the title, the ownership of the property, and certain other information with respect to interests. So yeah, that kind of information is available, not in the exact form you described, but it is available. And we are very mindful that this stuff is confusing and emotional to the public, and we've tried to provide useful information.
Thank you. And if I may, if I don't know if that's reviewed from time to time, but if I could just make the comment, if there's anything that we can do to, I think, as if I may say, if anything the government can do to help people better understand the process, I think that's a good thing, and I can appreciate there is information does exist, as you've indicated. So,
well, we consider very much part of our mandate to educate the public about the system, and to answer your question about updating, our website is constantly being updated. The printed materials are updated when they become significantly out of date. But because the system has constantly changed, there's been amendments, there's been changes in policy and the way it's applied, we do try to keep our information up to date so that the public has access to good information.
That's great, thank you. What is the, and this kind of relates to question, I hope we're not just rehashing stuff here, but what would be the best way in your mind for families to keep their land registry in good standing? Like, I often think if I bought a piece of property, I wouldn't really have to do anything. Once I buy it, I own it, it's registered in the system. But is there anything over the course of 50 years, say if somebody bought a piece of property today, that they would need to do every so often just to make sure that it remains on the public record in good order?
The simple answer is no. There's nothing you have to do. If the parcel, we're assuming this property has been migrated to the new system. Even under the old system, there's not much you have to do. But if it's been migrated to the new system, it's a land registration parcel. There's a parcel register that's accurate at the time it's brought into the system. Nothing has to be done to maintain that. That's a permanent record, and as long as the property is never conveyed, there's nothing that would have to be done. I mean, it is important, obviously, if there's any change, if someone dies, if the property's transferred to a different family member or something like that, and this has traditionally always been a problem, say with the family farm, for instance, that the patriarch passes the property down to his son, but no deed's ever recorded. Well, I mean, we emphasize to the public it's extremely important to, if there's a change in title, to change the parcel register, to get a deed on, or to probate the estate and ensure that the parcel register reflects the current ownership. But other than that, if you buy a piece of property, 50 years later you still own it, there's nothing you have to do. The system maintains that ownership, and it'll always be there. Nothing that a citizen has to do. Okay, thank you for that clarification. I know when people had owned properties from land grants, there had to be some indication, there had to been some proof of use. I think if there was a number of 40 years went by and people didn't have proof they had used that land, then they might be subject to losing the land. It might revert back to the Crown, but I think you've clarified with your answer that going forward, as long as a piece of property is registered, people don't have to worry about that. I could buy a piece of land in rural Nova Scotia and not do anything with it for 50 years, and as long as it's been passed down to my heirs, or if I'm still living at that time, it still belongs to me, and there's no. So I think you've clarified that with your answer. I mean, I might want to clarify that just a little bit. I didn't appreciate this is what you were referring to, but in the traditional registry system, before this act was passed, yes, there was always a risk that if a squatter was out on your land, built a camp on your land and occupied it for 30 years, you were at risk of losing a piece of the land. And without going into the legal aspects of the act in any great detail, that is much less of a risk under the new act. You are protected to a very large degree from squatter claims. Okay, that's great. And that would be the Land Registry Bill 156, would that be? The Land Registry Act, yes. Oh, it's the act now, of course, yeah. Could I give you an opportunity just to give a little bit of background on what that's meant for Nova Scotians? I think we've kind of discussed it already, but is there any points that you'd like to make that where that act has made things better? Well, I think Ms. Saunders addressed that. I'm not sure I could add a whole lot to what she had to say. I mean, the main benefit, which we continually emphasize, is this guarantee of title, which eliminates the need for constantly doing historical searches every time a property is transferred. That's a huge benefit. And the other principal benefit, though there are many others, is the ability to the e-registry, this electronic scanning of documents and the availability of the documents online, has made it much easier to search historic records and to determine the ownership of parcels of land. Those are probably the principal benefits, though there are others which Ms. Saunders alluded to. Thank you. I just have one last question, so I'm probably going to have a little extra time here, but I just was curious to know what type of technology is used to put the information up onto the internet for use by the public.
Ms. Saunders?
Well, I'll first admit I'm no IT expert. Property Online is really the internet-based application that is the external application. So it allows external users to view, and certain privileged users, such as authorized lawyers, to interact with the system through document e-submission and applications related to migration. The internal system has electronic forms as well. And our data is in an Oracle database, which is state-of-the-art database, and the infrastructure that supports that would be at the required provincial standards in terms of security and proper backups and all that. Application servers, production servers are all housed at the CEDO data center on Yonge Street.
Great, thank you very much. And Madam Chair, I will conclude my questioning with that.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. McMaster. And we'll turn to the NDP Caucus. Mr. Smith is beginning, I believe. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It sounds to me like the system that's in place is a pretty good one. Have you folks any idea in the sense of what you'd like to see in improvements? Are there any other changes that could be made to it? Are you looking for any any additional sort of changes in the system, or anticipating any?
Well, we have a constant list that is being prioritized and reprioritized in consultation with our partners, especially the Bar Society, with the staff who use the system. So there's always opportunity for anywhere from a very small minor change to a significant change. And each year we plan and usually are successful in implementing some small enhancements. This upcoming year, we have on the schedule some improvements to the parcel description certification application, which was defined through consultation with the surveyors and the Bar Society. We also are implementing some enhancements to electronic submission. One is a form that currently can't be e-submitted and that is holding up or blocking the ability to submit other documents, which is the electronic form 45. And we are also looking at implementing e-submission sometime this fiscal year for lenders. Currently, lenders have to submit their security interests and releases of those interests in paper. So we're always moving, attempting to move the system forward. It's always a balance between the resources required to manage the program on a day-to-day basis with the resources required to continue to move it forward, but we try to balance both.
Okay. You already told us, I think, that all of the papers now housed in Halifax in one spot or another, and that, in fact, you're able to work to move the work around. For instance, I think there was a reference that if BDEC isn't as busy, some of the work can, I guess, the electronic part of it can be dealt with with that office. Is there any movement afoot to move everything to Halifax? Could you have one central registry in Nova Scotia that looked after all of the counties?
No, not at all. In fact, the system, because it's electronic and because the staff can access that queue and process documents from anywhere in the province, that actually provides the benefit to allow offices to remain open in the smaller towns and to, retain staff in those possibly lower volume areas, but also to offer other services out of those facilities. So it actually allows us to distribute that work and to keep facilities distributed as well. And yeah, so there's no plan at all to.
All right, because I presume wherever they're working, you'd still need the same manpower, basically.
The system has really become, we have moved from virtually very much a front counter operation where we used to accept paper documents and index it at the front counter and hand the document and the receipt back to the lawyer, to almost completely a back office function where the staff could literally be anywhere, but there's no need to group them all in one place. They can be working from any location and still process documents.
Okay, well, I'm very pleased to hear that. That's a positive thing as far as I'm concerned, to keep these offices open in each of the jurisdictions. I think that's the questioning I have, and my friend will.
Mr. Prera.
And thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you very much for being here today. It's a really important topic. It seems, the use and possession and title to property is one of the building blocks of our communities and so many transactions, and it's important that we have an effective and efficient and accessible and affordable and fair system of establishing titles. I had a question about the guarantee of land ownership itself. And I understand that it has, in fact, quieted a lot of, previous complaints and clarified it. And so overall, it's been a great benefit. And I heard the list of benefits, and I think it's just wonderful. But I do have some questions about adverse possession. Over the last couple of years in my constituency in particular, there have been a number of questions that have come up where, you have good neighbors essentially saying, okay, we'll share a common driveway, or you can park your car here and over the winter, or you can build your shed and the overhang can come over the property line. Then all of a sudden someone else moves in and it becomes a property dispute. Now, these questions have always been there before the land registry, and they'll be here after. But I'm wondering, is there a kind of a good, neighborly, sensible, low-cost way of dealing with these issues without going through costly litigation?
Mr. Hill?
No, in a word, no. The system doesn't allow for the adjudication of those types of disputes in any way different than they've traditionally been adjudicated by the courts. The system provides for the certificate of title, and you could have this property certified and the property next to it certified, but they could still fight over where their boundary is, and people will. So, and that type of dispute, there's just no way that we could become involved in resolving that. I mean, it would be nice if there was a simpler system, and maybe that's a goal down the road for this program or some other, but for now, it's the courts that have to resolve those disputes if the parties can't resolve them themselves. So no, we don't have a system to resolve those types of disputes at all.
Just to follow up on Mr. McMaster's, because of the member from Inverness' question about, what would a property owner need to do to make sure that those issues are, clarified and dealt with better in the future? If they're not facing a claim at the moment or any kind of dispute, what should they be doing to clarify that? Especially as older people move to other places, those kinds of conventions disappear, and there isn't any proper paper trail.
That's a very good question. And one of the things, of course, that they can do to protect themselves from those sorts of claims is to migrate their property into the land registration system voluntarily if it hasn't already been triggered by a transaction, because of course the Act does provide for some protection against those kinds of squatters' claims and adverse possession claims. So that's the first thing they can do. The other thing is that complementary to this process of migrating title and having your lawyer certify title to the system, the person can get a survey, and a survey can often reveal these sorts of problems before they arise. If a surveyor comes in and does a boundary survey of the property and says, oh, by the way, it appears that your neighbor's driveway encroaches on your land by 15 feet, well, then you know that. Our system doesn't have any way of informing someone of that. But surveyors, as they always could, can uncover those sorts of issues. So the best way to protect against that kind of concern, for instance, if a person's buying a property that might be subject to those kinds of concerns or potential disputes, the answer would be to not only have the title certified to the system, but also to have a survey done so that you could uncover those sorts of issues. And surveyors are very good at determining things that might become a legal dispute, saying there's an encroachment here, or the boundary appears to be something different than what the fence would indicate, or that sort of thing. So that's really the way a person can protect themselves against those types of claims and those types of disputes, is to not just deal with the title of the property, but also get a proper survey and determine what that reveals.
Thank you. Another set of issues, actually at least one that I can recall clearly, is the public's access to shorelines and parks and waterways, where historically people have walked back and forth across properties, and then all of a sudden someone puts up a fence and says, no, that was always part of my property and you can no longer use it. How do you deal with those issues, where there's a public interest and a community interest and a probably well-established property right as well?
Well, the Act provides for those types of interests to be dealt with. If when a property is migrated to the new system, there isn't an immediate bar against any such claims. If those, I won't get into the legal detail, but if those claims pre-exist the property being brought into the system, there is a limitation period, a fairly long one, during which someone can enforce those types of interests. So if there is, for instance, a right-of-way, private or public, across a beach, and that beach is migrated by the owner, as long as someone doesn't let that limitation period pass, they can still enforce that interest within a period after the property is migrated. So the Act does provide for those kinds of interests to be enforced, notwithstanding migration of the property.
Is there an agency that defends the public interest in cases like that? Where I understand that individuals who have historically used it can raise the issue, but is there a public agency that says, hold on a second, that beach was always accessible, and that has been around?
I mean, there's no agency that specifically deals with that, but or that I'm aware of, but there is an act, I'm not intimately familiar with, but I believe it's called the Beaches Act or something like that, which does provide that if something is a public beach, it can be protected. But other than that, I'm not protected for public use. Other than that, I'm not aware of any agency that makes its business to enforce citizen claims to beaches.
Just a couple of other questions. I have
Yes,
2 minutes. Do I?
You certainly do.
I wanted to ask about access to information. I know that the member from Antigonish asked earlier, but what access will historians and academics and students and people who are interested in heritage or family genealogy, what kind of access will this system, what kind of access will they have, and will it be on a cost recovery basis? Or
The citizens have always had and will always have access to land records for those types of purposes. A lot of the use of our traditional paper-based registry offices was by genealogists and historians who would come and look at those historic documents and do whatever research they do. All that information is still available, much more conveniently, obviously, but is still available. A person who's doing research not for title purposes, but for historical or genealogical purposes, can still access that information in much the same way they always could. They don't have to be a subscriber to Property Online, and that's mainly lawyers and other real estate professionals. But a member of the public can go to a registry office, the same registry offices they would traditionally have gone to for this purpose, and can pay a very small fee. I don't know the exact amount. I think Ms. Saunders referred to a $5.95 or something. It's relatively low for a number of hours, and can search those records. And there was always a small fee just intended to cover part of the cost of the assistance that person might get from staff and the use of the facilities. They pay a very modest fee. They're entitled on payment of that fee to access records in the same way they always could.
Thank you very much. I believe my time has expired, but
Well, you actually have 2 more minutes.
oh, perfect. I will take them then.
You're certainly welcome to.
I had you've talked a lot about the Barrister Society and lawyers. What kinds of responses are you getting from real estate agents and financial institutions? And we had asked earlier about where the system will go next and what kinds of things it should be doing. What have you found in the system that you would like to see changed, and where would you like to go in the future?
Ms. Saunders might be better able to answer that question.
Yeah, Ms. Saunders.
Well, again, we're always looking to the future to make small, medium, or large changes in the system. Some of the things that have come up in the last few years, especially around the discussions related to real estate fraud, for instance, is layering some of the access to certain information in the system to general query users. So one of the things we have considered, and the Bill 156 actually has enabled us to do that, is to control certain access to information that the public don't need to have access to anymore, or even general query users such as realtors. For instance, signed documents that are enabling those interests in the parcel register. The parcel register very clearly says that Nancy Saunders is the owner of that property. A general query user does not need to see the document that substantiates that ownership, for instance. So we are looking at small changes to restricting certain access to information in the title, related to the title register. We're constantly looking at improving e-submission, bringing on more documents to get to. We hope to get to about a 95 or 97% e-submission for all documents in the land registry. Some of the other things that we've been looking at is digital signatures, kind of a public key infrastructure associated with document submission to improve the authentication around document submission. So those are more long-term items, but there's a list that we're always working on and working towards.
Just if I can understand the technical issue on migrating property. As I understand it, the first time it's done, there is a fee for transferring, the deed and registering it. But in subsequent transactions, that cost will be significantly less. Is that how it works?
The legal fees associated with revising a parcel register no longer include the need for that historic search. So that's eliminated from the fee that a citizen would pay or an entity would pay related to a property transaction once the parcel is in the system. Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. Those are all my questions, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Pereira. And we have a little bit of time left. I know that there's been a request for one piece of documentation. I think that I'll just have a look here. I think Mr. Call will ask for the detailed spending report, I think was what was mentioned. And I also would like to ask, and again with the committee's approval, just to see if we'd like to get more information. The question was asked around the original $14 million. I think it was you, Mr. Epstein, who asked about the initial cost over 7 years. I personally think it would be good for the committee to see a wrap-up of that, and I would imagine, again, our committee is Public Accounts Committee. We like to look at historic spending and how programs have gone, and I would, if it's available, I would like you to look back, if you could, Mr. Malloy, and see if we could get the $14 million. Just, were we on budget? Did it, you know, were there any overruns or savings, and how did that work out? And the other question I would have would be around the user fee. You, Mr. Malloy, mentioned that you had looked at it initially in 2002 when it was justified. Could we look at that? That's cost accounting when you take, even though you have staff that are working on a number of different projects, and they also do this land registry work, you could assign, say, 30% of their time to that and determine, you know, how the actual cost is for managing the system. So I don't know if you have that in the department, but hopefully you do, and we could have that for the committee. So that would be two requests that I have, again, with the indulgence of the committee. Mr. Pereira?
Just to be clear, what we're asking for is what Mr. Cole was asking for in terms of the actual costs associated with both the startup and the operation of the land registry system, and you're including now in that operation staffing for that unit?
No, not quite. I'm looking for the total cost accounting for the provision of the service. We have a user fee assigned to that, and you know, I think all members of the committee understand that user fees are supposed to be at least roughly in balance with the cost to deliver. So I'm just asking that the witnesses today are able to provide that to us.
So you're asking for revenues as well as expenses for the system?
I'm not asking for the revenue directly. I'm asking for the cost to deliver it right now. But yeah, anyway, it's just a furtherance, really, of the questions that Mr. Epstein asked, in addition to what Mr. Caldwell asked for. And I think it's important that we keep our eye on the historic spending as well, as you've often said. And I just, you know, in following the conversation, felt that would be additional information, which will be of use to us here at the committee.
Yeah, I don't think we have any problem with it. I just wanted to get some clarity on what the question was.
Yeah, Mr. Malloy, are you clear on what I'm looking for?
I think so, yes.
Okay, great.
We'll work with Darlene to make sure that we're providing the committee the information they're looking for.
Well, that would be great. Thank you very much, and we can certainly talk further about the details of it. But and with that, I'd like to give you a moment to close, if you would, if they had any final comments for the committee.
Well, yeah, thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank staff here today. You know, there's the whole public accountability and transparency of government is vital to these types of initiatives, and I also like to thank the committee for their questions today. You know, it was I thought it was a very good use of our time. The system has been in play now for a number of years, and I really hope that the committee has a sense of the good judgment and the work that's gone into bringing a system into into such a strong state of being that, you know, the point being clearly made, I don't want to go home tonight and have someone else living in my house. I'd like to know that when I go there, that I still have the keys to the door and I'm the one that's getting in, and if I'm not, I have a process in play to be able to rectify that. And I think we heard here today that clearly is the case, is stronger for Nova Scotians, and I think that's what, you know, the Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations mandate is all about, is continuing to improve service to Nova Scotians. So I'd like to thank the committee for their time this morning, and Madam Chair, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for being with us today. And we have just really no real new business, but there is a copy of our upcoming agenda, I think, for each member of the committee. You've received a copy of that. And the good news is that we're fully confirmed through to June 23rd. So we have our year end all planned now. So thank you very much. With a motion to adjourn, we shall do so. Thank you very much. We're adjourned.